burning people in hellfire. Who is truly responsible for the idea of burning in hellfire, the church or the biblical God? The concept of eternal damnation and hellfire has long been a central tenet of religious doctrines, especially within Christianity. However, when we examine historical events involving the Church's persecution of individuals, it raises another provocative question. Who is actually practicing this hellfire? Human institutions like the Church, acting on behalf of God, or the biblical God as described in the Bible book? The dark history of religious persecution. The role of the Roman Catholic and Anglican churches. Throughout history, religion has often served as a double-edged sword, a source of comfort and community for some, while for others a weapon of control, suppression, and violence. Two of the most powerful religious institutions, the Roman Catholic Church and the Anglican Church, have played significant roles in some of the darkest chapters of persecution. These institutions, often aligned with the ambitions of emperors, kings, and queens, used their influence to silence dissent, enforce conformity, and eliminate opposition. The cost was paid in blood, fear, and the suppression of free thought. Persecution by the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church, once the epicenter of Western Christianity, wielded unparalleled power, influencing not just religious but also political and social spheres. Any challenge to its authority or doctrines was met with severe punishment, often under the pretext of heresy. Giordano Bruno, 1548–1600, a visionary philosopher and scientist, Bruno proposed the existence of an infinite universe with countless worlds, directly challenging the Church's teachings. For rejecting core doctrines like the Trinity and transubstantiation, Bruno was arrested by the Roman Inquisition, imprisoned for 7 years, and eventually burned at the stake in Rome's Campo de' Fiori. His death epitomized the Church's resistance to scientific and philosophical progress. Jan Hus, c. 1372–1415, a Czech priest and reformer, Hus openly criticized the moral failings of the clergy, the sale of indulgences, and the authority of the papacy, advocating for the primacy of Scripture. His insistence on using vernacular language in worship threatened the Church's control. Convicted of heresy at the Council of Constance, he was burned at the stake despite being promised safe conduct. His execution ignited the Hussite Wars and laid the groundwork for the Protestant Reformation. William Tyndale, c. 1494–1536, an English scholar and theologian, Tyndale translated the Bible into English, making Scripture accessible to common people and challenging the Church's monopoly over religious texts. His translation undermined clerical authority and was banned by the Church. Arrested in the Holy Roman Empire, he was convicted of heresy, strangled, and burned at the stake. His work significantly influenced the King James Bible. Michael Servetus, 1511–1553, a Spanish physician and theologian, Servetus denied the doctrine of the Trinity and rejected infant baptism, challenging both Catholic and Protestant orthodoxy. After publishing his views, he was condemned by the Catholic Inquisition and later by John Calvin in Geneva. Arrested in Geneva, he was tried, convicted of heresy, and burned at the stake, symbolizing the intolerance of religious dissent across denominations. Marguerite Porete, c. 1250–1310. A French mystic and author, Porete wrote The Mirror of Simple Souls, which promoted direct communion with God and criticized the Church's rituals. Her radical ideas were deemed heretical, and she was arrested by Church authorities. After refusing to recant, Porete was burned at the stake in Paris. Her work continued to influence mystical thought after her death. Thomas Müntzer, c. 1489–1525. A radical Protestant reformer, Müntzer advocated for social and economic justice based on Christian principles, opposing both Catholic doctrines and Martin Luther's moderation. He played a leading role in the Peasants' War, urging revolt against feudal oppression. Captured after the war, he was tortured and executed by beheading. His ideas inspired later revolutionary movements. Galileo Galilei, 1564–1642, An Italian astronomer and physicist, Galileo supported the heliocentric theory, which contradicted the Church's geocentric teachings. His findings, based on telescopic observations, challenged the Church's authority. Tried by the Roman Inquisition, he was forced to recant his views and spent his remaining years under house arrest. Despite his persecution, Galileo's work laid the foundation for modern science. John Wycliffe, c. 1384, known as the Morning Star of the Reformation, Wycliffe translated the Bible into English and condemned church corruption, indulgences, and papal authority. Though he died of natural causes, he was posthumously declared a heretic at the Council of Constance. His body was exhumed and burned, and his teachings influenced later reformers like Jan Hus, Peter Abelard, 1079–1142. A French philosopher and theologian, Abelard challenged church doctrines, particularly regarding the Trinity. His teachings sparked controversy, leading to condemnation by church authorities. Forced to recant his views, Abelard spent his later years in monastic life, but his works remained influential in medieval scholasticism. Hypatia of Alexandria, c. 360–415. A celebrated philosopher and mathematician, Hypatia was a prominent figure in Neoplatonism during Alexandria's transition to Christian dominance. Seen as a symbol of pagan learning, she became a target of Christian zealots. She was brutally murdered by a mob incited by political and religious rivalries, marking a turning point in the decline of classical knowledge. The Catholic Church's alignment with monarchs amplified its reach. Spanish monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella unleashed the Inquisition, a campaign of terror to root out heresy and enforce religious orthodoxy. Thousands faced imprisonment, torture, and execution, cementing the Church's authority while leaving a legacy of fear. Persecution by the Anglican Church. Born out of King Henry VIII's break with Rome, the Anglican Church mirrored the Catholic Church's methods of persecution. Religious dissenters, Catholics under Protestant rulers and Protestants under Catholic rulers, found themselves at the mercy of royal decrees and state-sponsored religion. Thomas More, 1478–1535, a prominent English lawyer, philosopher, and devout Catholic, More refused to recognize Henry VIII as the supreme head of the Church of England or support the annulment of the king's marriage to Catherine of Aragon. His unwavering loyalty to the Pope and his opposition to the English Reformation led to his arrest for treason. He was tried, convicted, and beheaded. Later canonized as a saint by the Catholic Church, More remains a symbol of religious conviction and martyrdom. John Fisher, 1469–1535. A Catholic bishop and theologian, Fisher strongly opposed Henry VIII's break with Rome and the establishment of the Church of England. He denounced the king's divorce and the Act of Supremacy, which declared Henry as head of the Church. Arrested for treason, Fisher was executed by beheading. He was later canonized by the Catholic Church as a martyr for his faith. Anne Ascliffe, a young Protestant apprentice, Hunter refused to attend Mass or acknowledge Catholic doctrines during Queen Mary II's attempt to restore Catholicism in England. For his defiance, he was arrested, tried, and condemned for heresy. At just 19 years old, a Catholic recusant during the reign of Elizabeth I, Clitheroe sheltered Catholic priests and conducted clandestine worship in defiance of Anglican laws. Refusing to plead guilty to charges of harbouring priests, she was pressed to death under a heavy door, a punishment meant to avoid a trial that could endanger her family. She was later canonized as a saint by the Catholic Church. Edmund Campion, 1540–1581. A Jesuit priest, Campion sought to reconvert England to Catholicism during Elizabeth I's Protestant reign. His clandestine missionary work involved celebrating Mass and ministering to Catholics in secret. Captured, he was tortured and tried for treason. He was hanged, drawn, and quartered for his faith. Campion was later canonized as a saint by the Catholic Church. Mary Dyer, 1611–1660. A Quaker and religious dissenter, Dyer opposed Anglican doctrines and defied anti-Quaker laws in New England. Banished multiple times from Massachusetts, she continued to preach her faith, defying authorities. Arrested upon her return, she was hanged for her religious convictions. Dyer's martyrdom is remembered as a significant moment in the fight for religious freedom. The Anglican Church's persecution intensified under successive monarchs. Queen Mary I, known as Bloody Mary, sought to restore Catholicism, burning hundreds of Protestants at the stake. Her successor, Elizabeth I, reversed course, enforcing Anglican supremacy with fines, imprisonment, and executions for Catholics who refused to conform. The role of emperors, kings, and queens. Throughout history, emperors and monarchs exploited religion as a tool of power. Constantine the Great aligned with Christianity to unify the Roman Empire, cementing the Church's authority. Medieval kings and queens manipulated religion to consolidate control, using the Inquisition and other institutions to suppress dissent. Even in the Protestant Reformation, monarchs like Henry VIII established their own churches, ensuring that religion remained a means of enforcing loyalty and obedience. For rulers, the sword of faith was as important as the sword of steel. Reflections on religious persecution. This dark history raises profound questions. Why did God, often depicted as loving and merciful, allow such violence to be carried out in his name? Were these atrocities truly divine will, or were they the ambitions of men using religion to justify their actions? Can we reconcile the idea of divine love with the historical reality of religious violence and suppression? The narratives of persecution challenge the idea of unconditional divine love, and compel us to consider whether these stories reflect God's nature or humanity's darker instincts for power and control. Lessons for today. Religion has provided identity, community, and purpose for billions, but its history also reveals how dogma can become a tool of oppression. Today we must reframe faith as a source of liberation rather than restriction, a foundation for personal growth rather than a chain of fear and obedience. The stories of figures like Giordano Bruno, Jan Hus, Anne Askew, and Margaret Clitheroe remind us of the cost of free thought and the courage it takes to challenge authority. Their sacrifices call us to question, to learn, and to strive for a world where belief is a matter of personal conviction, not coercion. These historical cases show the Church, both Catholic and Anglican, actively executing individuals under the pretext of heresy, often employing fire as a means of punishment. This leads to questions. Who truly invented the phrase and concept of burning in hellfire, the biblical God or humans who claim to act in his name? Why did human institutions, particularly the Church, adopt physical hellfire as a tool for suppressing dissent? If the Church acted as God's representative, does this mean that earthly hellfire was their interpretation of divine justice? The Bible book references hellfire as a divine punishment for sinners, often in allegorical terms. However, the Church's actions, burning people at the stake, turned this spiritual metaphor into a brutal reality. Could the Church's historical persecution be an admission that hellfire is a man-made construct used to enforce conformity and suppress dissent? By asking these questions, we confront the uncomfortable intersection of theology, power, and human cruelty, challenging us to re-evaluate the origins and uses of the doctrine of hellfire in both religious and historical contexts. As we reflect on this history, let us work toward a future where faith inspires exploration, love, and justice, not fear and persecution.